Imagine standing in the middle of a quiet hillside where the wind carries nothing but silence. The sun burns above, the earth feels dry under your feet, and all around you the world is holding its breath. Now picture this silence being broken by the preparation of a crucifixion scene. Wooden beams laid on the ground, ropes coiled neatly waiting, cameras shifting into position. A story that shaped history about to be recreated in front of your eyes. This is not just a movie moment. It is the weight of centuries, faith, pain, and sacrifice coming together in one powerful scene. And today, you will step behind the curtain and see what it really felt like when we filmed it. The Crucifixion is not just another scene in a story. It is one of the most emotional and heavy images that anyone can bring to life on screen. When our team decided to film it, we knew from the beginning that this was not about creating a simple dramatic moment. This was about recreating history in a way that felt real, respectful, and unforgettable. The set itself was chosen with great care. It needed a place that could carry the silence of the moment, a place that felt stripped of comfort, a place where every shadow and every ray of light told its own truth. The location we found was raw and unpolished, a barren hillside that looked almost untouched by time. You could almost imagine the same ground being walked on 2,000 years ago. The air on the set was heavy even before. The cameras rolled, the crew moved slower than usual. The actors carried a quiet seriousness. There were no jokes, no loud conversations. Only the hushed instructions of the director and the low hum of equipment being adjusted. You could feel in your chest that everyone understood the weight of what we were about to film. Even the smallest detail mattered. The wood of the cross was not just a prop. It was built to look like something that belonged in history. Rough edges, splinters, uneven cuts, all of it designed to remind us that the crucifixion was not clean. Not polished, but brutal and real. As the cameras were set in place, we tested different angles to see how the sun would strike the hill. We wanted the scene to carry both light and darkness, to show both the pain and the meaning behind it. Makeup team worked in silence, creating wounds that looked painfully real, yet were done with the highest care and respect. There was no rush, no corner cut, because we knew this scene would carry more than just storytelling. It would carry emotion. The actors, especially the one who had to bear the cross, prepared themselves quietly. You could see in his eyes that this was not just another role. He was carrying more than wood on his back. He was carrying the story of suffering and sacrifice. Every movement he made was slow, steady, deliberate. He rehearsed without words, just with his body, and the silence around him made it all the more powerful. When everything was ready, there was a moment where the entire crew stood still. The cameras stopped adjusting. The assistants stopped moving. Everyone just watched as the actor took his place. It felt like time slowed down, like the air itself knew this was not an ordinary moment. It was history being reborn right in front of us. That was the scene we had prepared, the world we had built, and the story we were about to tell. The first thing you notice when recreating a crucifixion is not the camera, not the crew, but the weight of the silence that surrounds everyone. It is the kind of silence that makes your skin feel tight, the kind that presses on your chest. For the actor, the challenge was more than physical. Carrying a heavy wooden beam on his back under the burning sun was exhausting. But what wore him down even more was the feeling that he was walking into someone else's suffering. Every step he took on that dusty ground carried a shadow of pain that was not just his own. The weather became its own enemy. The heat reflected off the rocks until it felt like the ground itself was breathing fire. Sweat ran down faces, not only of the actors, but the crew holding cameras, boom poles, and lights. There were no short breaks that could erase the exhaustion. Even when someone drank water, the relief lasted only seconds before the heat swallowed it. Some days it felt like the earth wanted to test us, to see if we could handle even a fraction of what that historical moment must have been. Then came the physical struggle of posture. The actor had to be tied, arms spread wide against the wood, body pressed against splinters. Even though it was staged, the body still resisted. Muscles cramped, shoulders ached, wrists felt raw under the ropes. The director had to cut often, not because of mistakes, but because the body simply could not hold the pose for long stretches. Each take drained him. By the third or fourth, you could see the weight in his eyes, the way his body sagged even before the cross was lifted. And yet each time he straightened himself again, choosing to push through as if he knew the audience needed to feel that pain through him. The emotional challenge spread beyond the actor. The crew, people who had filmed battles, storms, even scenes of loss before, found themselves unusually quiet. Camera operators who usually joked between takes stood still, their eyes low. Makeup artists who normally chatted while working barely spoke. It was as if everyone was carrying a secret. Wait, they could not put into words. Some admitted later that they struggled to even watch the monitor when the actor cried out. It felt too real. Too raw. Balancing realism with respect was another battle. Could not allow the scene to look theatrical or exaggerated. Every choice had to be careful. It's too much blood, and it would lose dignity. Too little, and it would lose truth. The ropes, the nails, the crown of thorns, each one was created not as decoration, but as a reminder. And each time they were adjusted, the actor winced as if history itself had touched him. The makeup team confessed that sometimes they had to turn their faces away while painting wounds, because for a second, their hands shook. But perhaps the hardest challenge was invisible, was the question echoing in every heart. Are we worthy of telling the story? Can we capture it without reducing it to just an image on a screen? That doubt weighed heavier than the wooden beams, heavier than the burning sun. And yet, it was this very doubt that pushed everyone forward. It made the actor push through exhaustion. It made the crew hold the camera steady even as their arms trembled. It made us all remember that this was not about spectacle. This was about truth. Filming a crucifixion is not like filming any other scene. You cannot just place a camera and call for action. Every decision about how the story is framed changes how the audience will feel it in their bones. From the first day, the director made it clear that the camera was not there to simply observe. It had to become a witness. And a witness does not just look from a distance. A witness feels close enough to hear the breath, close enough to see the trembling of a hand against wood. It's close enough to feel the silence settle heavier than sound. We began with camera placement. One lens was angled low, staring upward at the cross. This angle was not just chosen for drama, it was chosen to make the audience feel the weight of looking up. The way people in history would have looked up with grief and disbelief. Another camera stayed tight on the actor's face, capturing the sweat running down his skin.
Oh no.
The way his lips trembled as he tried to breathe. No makeup detail was wasted because the lens showed everything, even the smallest movement of the eye could tell the story of pain. Lighting was another challenge. Natural sunlight can be unforgiving, but here it became part of the truth. The sun was harsh, casting sharp shadows on the wood, cutting across the actor's body. Instead of softening it, we leaned into it. The unforgiving light mirrored the unforgiving moment. The crew positioned reflectors to bounce sharp light against the cross, so that every crack in the wood, every cut in the skin became visible. At times the actor's eyes squinted against the brightness. The director whispered, "Keep it," because it showed the raw discomfort that no artificial light could ever mimic. Sound design was treated with the same weight. Instead of filling the space with music, the first takes were recorded in silence. The creak of wood, the rasp of ropes tightening, the shallow breath of the actor, these became part of the soundscape. Later, during playback, the silence of the set was more haunting than any orchestra could create. When the actor shifted his weight, the microphone picked up the small groan of the cross rubbing against stone. The sound was so sharp that some in the room flinched. It reminded us that sometimes the smallest noises tell the loudest truths. Props were another battlefield of detail. The crown of thorns was hand-woven from dry, brittle branches. Each thorn was real, though carefully blunted. For safety, yet still sharp enough that pressing it onto the actor's head left faint scratches on his skin. The nails were forged by hand, heavy iron that looked rusted with time. Of course, no nails pierced flesh, but the way they were placed, the way shadows fell on them, created the illusion of reality without cruelty. The ropes were coarse, the kind that left red marks even when tied loosely. Nothing on set was clean, nothing looked staged. Every object told the story that this was a world of dust, blood, and sacrifice. Even in the middle of something as heavy as a crucifixion scene, life finds small ways to break through the silence. These moments did not lessen the seriousness, but they reminded everyone that behind the pain being filmed stood a group of real people who carried their own laughter, exhaustion, and humanity. One morning, as the actor prepared to shoulder the heavy wooden cross for rehearsal, the crew noticed a stray dog wandering onto the set. Dust clung to its fur, and it wagged its tail without fear, circling around the base of the cross as if it belonged there. For a moment, the actor, still in costume, knelt down and scratched its head. The crew, tense from hours of serious work, softened. People smiled quietly, some even chuckled. It was not scripted, it was not planned, but it reminded everyone that, even in stories of suffering, life continues in unexpected ways. Another moment came when the crown of thorns was being placed. The makeup artist, with steady hands, lowered it carefully onto the actor's head. But as the dry branches touched his skin, one thorn caught on his wig, refusing to sit properly. The crew tried adjusting it again and again, but the thorn kept snagging. Finally, the actor broke into a small laugh. The sound startled everyone, because until then he had stayed in complete silence, carrying his role with such gravity. The laugh spread quickly, and soon the director himself smiled and said even history had its interruptions. For a brief few seconds, the weight lifted, and the crew remembered that they were allowed to breathe. During breaks, the actor often lay flat on the ground, arms spread wide, not because he was still acting, but because his body needed to rest. Crew members placed umbrellas over him to block the sun, and someone offered cold water pressed against his lips. There was a strange beauty in those pauses. It looked as if the world had stopped moving just to let him recover. No one rushed him. No one hurried the process. It was understood by all that this was not a scene that could be forced. It had to be lived slowly, respectfully, moment by moment. The sound crew had their own small challenge. The microphones were so sensitive that they picked up every shuffle of boots, every rustle of clothing. At one point, a cameraman's stomach growled loudly in the silence, and the take had to be cut. Everyone laughed softly, and the tension cracked. But instead of annoyance, the director thanked the crew member for accidentally giving everyone a chance to release their nerves. It was strange, but the smallest mistakes became gifts in those hours, keeping the team grounded. And there was one more moment, unforgettable in its simplicity. As the actor stood tied to the cross, head bowed, the sky began to change. Clouds moved slowly across the sun, dimming the light until the hill looked cloaked in shadow. No one spoke. No one moved. For several minutes, the cameras kept rolling, even though the take was finished. It felt as though the world itself was watching, as if the air wanted to participate in the story. Later, when reviewing the footage, the director whispered, "We could never have planned this." It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful, behind-the-scenes moment is when nature itself joins the performance. These small flashes of humanity, of laughter, of unexpected beauty, gave balance to the heaviness. They reminded everyone that while they were recreating suffering, they themselves were alive, breathing, working together. And that quiet truth became just as important as the cameras and lights. When the cameras finally stopped and the cross was lowered for the last time, the silence on set did not vanish. It lingered, like a shadow that refused to step away. People moved slowly, as if their bodies were there, but their minds were still inside the scene. It was in that quiet aftermath that the real reflections began. For the actors, the weight of the crucifixion did not end when the director called cut. It clung to them. The actor who bore the cross said later that he felt the wood on his back even when he was lying in bed that night. His shoulders ached, but more than that, his heart carried a heaviness he could not easily describe. He admitted he had rehearsed lines and actions before, but this role was different. It felt like stepping into someone else's pain and realizing you could not leave it behind, so easily crew members carried their own reflections. A camera operator, who had stood for hours with the lens trained on the actor's face, shared that he had never struggled so much to keep his hands steady, not because the equipment was heavy, but because his own emotions kept rushing to the surface. He confessed that watching the silent tears on the monitor felt like intruding into something sacred. Another crew member, the sound engineer, said, "The hardest part was not recording the cries, but choosing when to leave the silence untouched." That silence, he said, spoke louder than any sound could. The makeup team had its own quiet stories. One artist explained that painting wounds onto skin had always been part of their craft, but this time it felt different. She said that every brushstroke made her pause because it no longer felt like makeup, it felt like history. She admitted she had to step away more than once to breathe, to remind herself it was only a performance. And yet she also said she had never been prouder of her work, because in that moment she understood the responsibility of storytelling. Some reflections went even deeper, touching the spiritual side. A lighting assistant, not an actor, not in front of the camera, admitted that being part of the crucifixion scene stirred something inside him. He said he grew up hearing the story in church, but he had never felt it in his body the way he did on set. Seeing the cross raised, even as a prop, made him feel as though he was standing in the presence of something larger than film. Him, of the real cost of sacrifice. And then there were reflections that no one spoke aloud but could be seen in their faces. The quiet drive home after filming, the way some eyes stayed red long after tears had dried. The way conversations slowed down in the days that followed. It was as if the crucifixion had left fingerprints on everyone who stood there, visible but permanent. The greatest takeaway was not about technical success, or even about how realistic the scene looked on screen. The true takeaway was about respect. Respect for the story, respect for the pain, respect for the responsibility of telling it. Everyone left the set with a piece of the crucifixion carried inside them, not as a weight to drag them down, but as a reminder of why they tell stories. And all because stories can make people feel, remember, and even change. As the final day of filming ended, the set did not clear the way other sets do. Usually, once the director says that's a wrap, laughter breaks out, people clap, and the crew rushes to pack equipment. But this time no one moved so quickly. The cross still stood against the hill, leaning slightly, its shadow stretching long across the ground. The crew gathered their tools quietly, as though leaving a sacred place rather than a film location. No one wanted to speak too loudly. It felt wrong to break the atmosphere with casual noise. The actor who had carried the cross stayed alone for a few minutes after everyone else had stepped back. He stood where the ropes had held him, his arms crossed against his chest now, no longer spread wide. His eyes scanned the horizon, and when he finally turned, looked different, like someone who had walked through something heavy and come out changed on the other side. Later, he would say that the crucifixion scene was not just the hardest performance of his career, but the most personal. He said it taught him what it meant to give yourself to a story completely, till the line between acting and living begins to blur. The director also reflected in his own way, sitting on a rock. After the final take, he whispered that filmmaking is often about illusion making. The unreal appear real. But this was different. This was not illusion. This was truth retold. He admitted that he had worried for months about whether the team could capture the crucifixion with dignity. Now, watching the footage on the monitor, he felt a kind of relief. Not because the scene was finished, but because he knew it would speak to people beyond just what they saw. It would speak to something deeper inside them. Even the crew, usually practical and focused on the technical side, carried their own reflections. One grip said he had never felt so connected to a project, even though all he did was set up stands and cables. He explained that in most films his work disappears into the background, unseen. But here, even his smallest action felt like part of something larger. He said it reminded him that no role on a set is small when the story itself is powerful. The final thoughts that echoed across the team were not about costumes or angles or makeup, but about responsibility. Everyone knew they had touched a story that belonged to millions of hearts across the world, and they carried a quiet hope that when audiences finally saw the crucifixion, they would not just see an actor tied to wood, but they would feel the weight of history, sacrifice, of love, of pain, all captured in those moments. As the sun dipped low and the hill turned gold with fading light, one of the producers said something that stayed with everyone. "We came here to film a scene, but we're leaving with something we can't put into words. And that was the truth. The Crucifixion had been more than a film set. It had been an experience that left everyone marked in ways they might never fully explain. The crucifixion scene ended for us when the cameras were turned off. But the weight of it never truly left. Days later, crew members still spoke of the silence that fell on set, of the way the air felt heavy, as if it carried memory. Some admitted they dreamed of it, the image of the cross standing alone against the sky, replaying in their minds. That is the power of a story like this. It does not stay on the hill where it was filmed. It follows you, reminding you of something larger than yourself. For the actor, the experience became more than just part of his career. He confessed that he carried a strange ache long after, not just in his body, but in his spirit. He said he felt as though he had touched a moment that belonged to history, and that kind of touch leaves a mark you cannot wash away. For the director, it was not about whether the scene looked perfect, but about whether it carried truth. And for the crew, it was a reminder that every cable laid, every lens adjusted, every light held steady, had played a role in retelling something sacred. When you finally see the crucifixion on screen, you may notice the dust rising as the cross is lifted. You may notice the sweat dripping from the actor's brow or the sound of wood creaking under weight. But what you may not see are the dozens of silent hearts standing behind the camera, carrying respect in every breath, every step, every choice. What you may not feel is the way the hill seemed to hold its own silence, as if nature itself wanted to participate in the story. But if we did our job well, you will feel the truth of it not as fiction, but as something alive, something unforgettable. That is what filmmaking is at its most powerful. It is not just about creating images. It is about creating an experience that stays with you, reshaping the way you see the world. And in this crucifixion scene, we found more than art. We found a moment that humbled us, challenged us, and reminded us why stories matter as you watch. Remember this: behind every frame is not only craft, but a collective heartbeat of people who carried the weight of history with care. The crucifixion is not just a scene, it is a reminder of sacrifice, of love, of endurance. And it asks us all a question: what will you carry forward after seeing it?